At the beginning of 1967, the Americans used B-52s to bomb communist bases near the South Vietnamese capital, Saigon. They were trying to clear the area of Viet Cong. The savagery and apparent futility of the war aroused increasing dissent back home.
This confused war has played havoc with our domestic destinies. Despite feeble protestations to the contrary, the promises of the Great Society have been shot down on the battlefield of Vietnam. The pursuit of this widened war has narrowed the promised dimensions of the domestic welfare programs, making the poor, white and Negro, bear the heaviest burdens both at the front and at home.
Desperate to put more pressure on Hanoi, in August, Johnson extended the bombing of the North to within 10 miles of the Chinese border.
First, I would like to make it clear that these airstrikes are not intended as any threat to Communist China, and they do not, in fact, pose any threat to that country. We believe that Peking knows that the United States does not seek to widen the war in Vietnam.
Johnson was weakened by the growth of the anti-war movement in America.
Mothers throughout the land, pack your boys off to Vietnam. Come on, fathers, don't hesitate. Send your sons off before it's too late. Be the first one on your block. Have your boy come home in a box. And it's 1, 2, 3. What are we fighting for? Don't ask me, I don't give a damn. Next stop is Vietnam. And it's 5, 6, 7. Open up the pearly gates. Yeah, there ain't no time to wonder why we all wanna die.
When you turned on AFN and you saw riots in the streets and whatever, and guys were saying, wait a minute, why am I fighting here when these guys at home are saying this is the wrong thing to do?
In public, Johnson staged a show of optimism and support for General Westmoreland and his troops.
The enemy is not beaten, but he knows that he has met his master in the field. He is trying to buy time, hoping that our nation's will does not match his will.
In 1968, in the fields and on the rivers, massive preparations were being made by the communists for concerted attacks throughout South Vietnam. Weapons, ammunition and supplies were moved to the south for an offensive planned for the Vietnamese New Year, Tet. The communists hoped to spark a general uprising across the country.
Taxis carried chrysanthemums into Saigon for the Tet market. Hidden underneath them were AK-47s. The people supported the revolution. They helped us. We were able to penetrate the security in the city. We changed our clothes and carried fake identity documents. The people of Saigon hid us in their houses.
I didn't want the enemy to know that I knew what was going to happen. I did know. I made a mistake in not making that known to the American public because they were caught by surprise.
The strength of the Tet offensive came as a shock to Westmoreland and the American public. On television, they saw their South Vietnamese allies fighting the Viet Cong in the streets of Saigon itself. Worse still, they saw the American embassy penetrated by Viet Cong commandos.
Now CIA men and MPs have gone into the embassy and are trying to get the snipers out by themselves.
With the Tet Offensive at its height, leading American politicians were turning on the president.
It is said the Viet Cong will not be able to hold the cities, and that is probably true. But they have demonstrated, despite all of our reports of progress, of government strength, and of enemy weakness, that 500,000 American soldiers, with 700,000 Vietnamese allies, with total command of the air, total command of the sea, backed by the huge resources and the most modern weapons, that we are unable to secure even a single city from the attacks of an enemy whose total strength is about 250,000.
The fiercest battle was to recapture the ancient city of Hue.
How long do you think it's going to take you to get through this city?
We'll be here in a few weeks anyway, cleaning it out. It'll take a little while to get it out of here.
You lost any friends?
Quite a few. We lost one the other day. Good buddy, man. The whole thing stinks, really.
When Hue was eventually retaken, the Americans found that thousands of civilians had been murdered by the communists. Tet was a major defeat for the Viet Cong. Their main objective, to inspire a nationwide uprising, had failed. But Johnson had been stunned by the scale of the Tet Offensive. Disillusioned, Secretary of Defense McNamara was leaving office. Johnson replaced him with Clark Clifford.
I'd ask questions like, when is the war going to end? Well, we don't know. How many more men do you think we're going to lose? Well, we really don't know. Then I finally got down to it and said, what is our plan to win the war in Vietnam? Turned out there wasn't any. The plan was just to stay with it and ultimately hoping that the enemy would finally give up.
Johnson was persuaded that the war could not be won on the battlefield and that he must negotiate.
I renew the offer I made last August to stop the bombardment of North Vietnam. We ask that talks begin promptly, that they be serious talks on the substance of peace.
What he said next surprised the world.
I shall not seek, and I will not accept the nomination of my party for another term as your president.
In May 1968, peace negotiations began in Paris. They were soon deadlocked. The communists were determined to rule a united Vietnam. The United States was not prepared to abandon the South. As the difficult negotiations continued, the Republicans were campaigning for the presidency. In public, Richard Nixon supported Johnson's peace efforts.
I have pointed out time and again that at a time that the President of the United States has the responsibility and is trying to negotiate in Paris for an honorable end of the war, that we should give him every chance to bring that war to a conclusion before this election and before his term ends, and that certainly no candidate for president, and certainly I will not make any statement that might pull the rug out from under him and that might destroy the chance to bring the war to a conclusion.
In fact, Nixon's campaign team was having secret talks with the South Vietnamese government.
I was in touch with the Republicans, with the entourage of Mr. Nixon, and the Republicans urged us to stand firm.
The worst point
was, at least for Lyndon Johnson, was when he realized that negotiations were stalled. And I do know this, that he heard close to the election time in '68 that Nixon, or one of Nixon's emissaries, was telling the South Vietnamese, don't make a deal, you get a better deal under Nixon.
America's war in Vietnam was to last another 4 years.